Hi, everyone. Welcome to a brand new season of Inquirer Gameday Central alongside Jeff McLane. I'm Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from the Lincoln Financial Field press box, getting set for the Eagles' preseason opener against the Cincinnati Bengals. Jeff, it has been a long 179 days since the Super Bowl. Who's counting? Apparently, I am. How are you feeling going into today's game?
Yeah, Olivia, thanks for having me for the full 30 minutes,
Yeah.
not the usual five or so minutes. I'll be here for the whole entire broadcast this time and moving forward. So happy to be here and looking forward to the Eagles' first preseason game. Well, I mean, honestly, not really that much. It is preseason football, but there are a bunch of unknowns, I think, and some of those unknowns will be playing tonight, namely some of the rookies.
Yeah, not quite the excitement level, as you said, as a typical regular season game. However, there's so many interesting storylines throughout training camp, so many position battles going on, and a lot of them are going to play out tonight. So we're excited to dive into those in just a moment. However, before we get started, just a reminder, we want you to be a part of our conversation. You can head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day if you're not already there. Leave us a comment down in the chat. Also, if you're on social media, if you're on YouTube, Facebook, leave us a comment in the chat there too, a question, whatever is on your mind. We want to hear from you, and we will get to some of those questions throughout our show today. All right, Jeff, if there is anything that Eagles fans are going to be watching for in today's game, it is going to be Jahad Campbell and perhaps some of these Eagles draft picks, but particularly Campbell. He is the star, the headliner of this draft class, and it's been a really interesting offseason for him. He was sidelined during OTAs as he recovered from a shoulder injury, recovered from shoulder surgery more specifically, and now he has been back in action in training camp almost a little bit unexpectedly. Vic Fangio said back in June that maybe Campbell was going to get on the field in August, and lo and behold, we get their first day of training camp in late July, and Campbell's out there. However, he was out there in a limited capacity for about the first couple weeks of training camp, but starting on Monday, he has been a full participant, so he's been a full go. He's looked really, I think, personally impressive. He's been incredibly physical, almost at times too physical against some of his teammates. And now he is potentially going to have this opportunity to get on the field and really display that physicality, that speed, the athleticism that we have seen in practice, but against another opponent, perhaps at a little bit more of a full speed. What did the Eagles need to see from Campbell tonight if he wants to contend for that starting vacancy alongside Zach Bond that's currently open because Nakobe Dean is out injured?
Yeah, I'm not sure. They're thinking about the starting spot just now. That look, they want him to get his feet wet, get out there, and play live football, NFL football for the first time. It won't be as fast as it will be when the regular season starts, but it will be a step up for him compared to what he's seen so far in training camp. He's you mentioned it. He's looked good. He's looked the part. He's made some athletic plays. You see the explosiveness. You see the strength. He's big for an inside linebacker. They've had him down on the edge a little bit, whether it's he's got to bump down in an overload situation or they've had him rush straight up a few times. He's not quite ready for that. I think he's been working almost exclusively with the inside linebackers. But look, at some point he's going to be the starter on this team. It's just a matter of when. It could be from a week one, but I'm not so sure they want to throw him out there just yet. Jeremiah Trotter is holding down that position for the most part and has done a great job. I know you mentioned Zach Bond. He hasn't been practicing because of a back injury, but that's allowed the young guys to play and to get some reps and to show whether they can win this job or not. And I wouldn't, I think I'd be, remiss if I didn't mention the other rookie, Smile Mondon, who's also gotten first team reps. So, Campbell's got to go out there, and I don't imagine he's going to play a lot, but they want to see him how he performs at this speed. And then I think next week with the joint practices and maybe another preseason game, they'll get a better indication about whether he has a chance to start from week one. I'm still not sure that's going to be in their plans.
Yeah, I mean, you think back just to a couple years ago where it seemed like the Eagles were in crisis mode at inside linebacker, and it ended up being this revolving door of players throughout the season. But, Jeff, going into this season, how does this inside linebackers group compare to those of the past that you've covered?
Yeah, I threw this out there on Twitter and in my practice observation notes just after watching the young guys. I've been around for a little while, and this is probably the greatest group that they've had in terms of potential. They have to go out there and do it. but the depth is far greater than they've ever had. And this is, that's partly by design. Howie Roseman learned from Andy Reid and Joe Banner in terms of how they, roster philosophy and roster building. And that's just not important position to them as some of the other ones. Now, Vic Fangio has come in. He places more emphasis on that position in terms of his scheme. He has a long history developing some of the greatest inside linebackers who've ever played the game at multiple spots. And so he's kind of factored a little bit into that, not only in terms of what he wants for his defense, and I'm sure he's got a voice in the room, but also in just how he coaches these guys up. And he's taken Zach Bond and turned him into a former edge into an all-pro caliber inside linebacker. But then you look at what they've done in the draft and what they've done in terms of acquiring guys in these last few years. Nakobe Dean predates Vic Fangio, but before the injury showed that he could play at a high level. We still don't know when he's going to be back. It's probably not going to be sometime until October, maybe even November. But then you expend draft picks on Jahad Campbell and Mondon, and that gives you 5 guys who I think have starting caliber talent. And I think that's going to be exciting to see for Eagles fans who have long kind of pined for that type of talent at that position. Maybe it's been a little, I think their expectations have been like a little bit out of whack in terms of what they want out of that position. But certainly in Vic Fangio's scheme, it does make sense.
Yeah, it could be as early as tonight. Fans can expect to see Campbell and Mondon out there potentially together at times. We'll see. What we most likely won't see is much of Andrew Makuba. Now we've seen him out there warming up throughout these warm-ups that are undergoing literally right in front of me right now. However, he has been nursing a shoulder injury. He's just come back. He's now practicing in a limited capacity. So that could mean this is a big night for Sidney Brown, who is vying for the starting, perhaps not starting safety role, as Cooper DeJean, it looks like, at least at the moment, he has been assuming that role when the Eagles are in base defense. But when the Eagles are in nickel, opposite Reed Blankenship, that it could be Sidney Brown's job, and it has been a long time coming for him. Tore his ACL back in the 2023 season finale. He didn't return to action until week 7 last year, and as a result, it was hard for him to not almost literally get his legs underneath of him, just because you're coming back when the season is in full swing. He doesn't have a whole lot of time to ramp back up. And as a result, he was ultimately buried in the depth chart behind a guy like Tristan McCollum. He was the first guy on the field when there were any injuries, or if you think back to last season, ejections at safety when C.J. Gardner-Johnson came out of that game against the Commanders game. That it was McCollum who entered in relief of him, not Brown. We've heard from Vic Fangio. He has spoken highly, I would say, of Sidney Brown and has commended his progress. However, he said as well that he needs to add some polish in his game. He needs to recognize things a little bit quicker. And now, again, to your point, Jeff, this isn't going to be exactly like a regular season game, but it will be more live action for Brown to try to show off some of those instincts that he needs to have at that position. When you look at the way, Jeff, that the competition battle has played out recently, do you feel like it's Brown's job to lose at this point?
Yeah, real quick, can we say that nickel's base now? Like, yeah,
I think that's.
I mean, I'm just. Can we? Yeah, like I think we got to tell every reporter across the NFL that base personnel is no longer base personnel. It's nickel, because the Eagles are in nickel 75% or more of the time in Vic Fangio's scheme. So I know that we're going to, Cooper DeJean is probably going to be. I don't know if he's probably going to be, but right now I guess he projects as the guy to play safety and base. But the majority of snaps are going to go to either Sidney Brown or Andrew Makuba or somebody else at that position opposite Reed Blankenship. But sorry, to get back to your point, Sidney Brown, when they drafted Andrew Makuba, it was a little bit of a surprise, but not entirely. And I say a little bit of surprise because they just expended a pretty significant amount of draft capital on Sidney Brown just 2 years prior, an early 3rd round pick. And here we are just 2 years later into that experiment, and you're expending a 2nd round pick and only a few more spots ahead of Sidney Brown on Andrew Makuba. So, I kind of called around, talked to some people, but also had the general sense that, it was obvious they weren't in love with Sidney Brown, even though I know he came back and it kept saying he wasn't accustomed to the scheme. It wasn't like he was that far behind Tristan McCollum, who was ahead of him, as you mentioned, on the depth chart. Now, I'm not saying that they hate Sidney Brown, but I just wonder if Sidney's the type of guy that Vic Fangio loves in his type of scheme. So for them to all of a sudden go out and draft Andrew Makuba when they have this position empty, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, they had traded away. And a quick aside, sounds like he may have suffered a really bad injury today at Texans camp. But it just made you wonder, what do they really think about Sidney Brown and Makuba? They spoke glowingly about. But just 2 years prior, they spoke glowingly about Sidney Brown's potential. What we've seen over these first several weeks in camp, or few weeks in camp at a Brown, it's hard to say. In the safety position, especially when you have that Vic Fangio scheme, he's playing a lot of too high safety shells, and the ball doesn't come that way a lot. I don't think really that Jalen Hurts really challenged those guys a lot and threw downfield a lot, which is fine. He was just taking what was given to him. But as a result, you just didn't see Sidney around the ball a lot. You saw a few times. There was a play last week that kind of made me wonder, is Sidney going to be right for this team and this scheme in terms of how he plays? He raced down from the post on a run by A.J. Dillon, and he kind of touched him up, but he took a bad angle. And in fact, I really don't think he would have been able to tackle, especially A.J. Dillon. So I'm really excited to see how he plays tonight. Makuba, as you mentioned, probably won't go. So it's going to take a little while. If you ask me going into the training camp, which position would Howie Roseman address first? I probably would have mentioned safety if based upon what would happen in camp. Edge rusher, I think, is an issue. He went out and traded for a cornerback. And I know we're going to talk about that competition and what that trade says about that competition a little further down. But I still wouldn't rule out them doing something at safety, because I'm just not sure that Makuba's going to be ready, and I'm just not sure if Sidney Brown's going to be the guy they want in that spot.
Yeah, you remember what Avonte Maddox called Sidney Brown in training camp 2 years ago. He's a heat-seeking missile, and I think that leaves a lot of opportunity for big play potential, but then there's also the risk of big misses too, and big whiffs, and that's what you don't want to see from Sidney Brown. So we'll see exactly how he fares in the game tonight. I think we have a comment here from Garrett on YouTube. He says, what do the Eagles have to prove, if anything, tonight? I would say that Sidney Brown has a lot to prove, potentially. This could potentially be a big game from him. I don't necessarily think the Eagles as a team have very much to prove, but I think there are certainly certain players that could stand to make up some big ground in their respective competition battles. So speaking of those competition battles, let's get into this outside cornerback competition. I think that has been one of the marquee battles throughout training camp that we've discussed. We've got this comment here over on X from Philip Maddox. He wants to know our feelings on where things stand right now among the outside cornerbacks. I was going to say between, because it has mostly been Keely Ringo and Adoree Jackson vying for that job opposite Quinyon Mitchell. However, Jeff, as you mentioned, Howie Roseman goes out and acquires Jacorian Bennett from the Las Vegas Raiders in exchange for defensive tackle Thomas Booker. Now, I think for the most part, we've seen, as camp has played out, we've seen a lot of back and forth in terms of maybe who had a marginally better day, Adoree Jackson, Keely Ringo. But for the most part, I don't think anyone has quite separated themselves just yet. Just the other day in practice on Tuesday, Keely Ringo had an opportunity to make a really big play. It turned into a pass breakup, but ultimately it was a dropped pick six, and a big opportunity, and you could tell he was really frustrated at the end of it. He's had been in some chances, he's had some opportunities to make really big plays. We haven't always seen that from him. I'm really interested, Jeff, to see if either of those players are going to play tonight. I would suspect that we have a good chance of seeing them in some preseason action. But if things were to end right now, who do you think would ultimately win that starting cornerback role?
Wow, you put me on the spot. I still think it's a toss-up. I think they want Keely to go out and win it. This is a guy they drafted. He has a lot of potential. They love, the size. I mean, he runs well for his size. It's just there's these inconsistencies, as you just mentioned. The drop pick six, not a big thing. He made a really good play on the ball. I mean, he undercut that route, and I don't think Jalen saw him. That's just one play. He's made a lot of plays in camp. He's had other days though when you see him getting beat, and maybe he's not. He's got the right type of technique on a certain play. So I'm not sure if he's done enough yet. It's early though. Adoree Jackson, a veteran, he's been around. He's entering his 9th season. Vic Fangio's comments about him last week were a little awkward, saying that this is his chance to prove it. And we're like, all right, well, he started in like 80-something games. I mean, I don't know how he hasn't proved it. Well, both those teams didn't want him, is pretty much what Vic Fangio said. And I guess he's right to some extent, right? But because when you hit free agency, if a team really loves you, you're typically not going to go anywhere. They're going to keep you. They're going to keep the great guys. But that still doesn't mean Adoree Jackson can't get it done. He's a good cover corner. I'd be worried about him in the run versus Keeley, who probably is much better at tackling. But that's just a small percentage of what you want out of your cornerbacks. But I'm not sure that the trade for Jacorian Bennett really says that they're not happy with the competition. But I think that because no one separated themselves, and when I say they separated themselves, I feel like it's not like one guy hasn't played better than the other. It's like both haven't no one's separated because no one's played at a really high level. And because then you look over there and you look at Quinyon Mitchell and you look at Cooper DeJean, you see elite level cornerback play. So you're being able to compare it against that. The Eagles haven't had that in a long time, multiple elite cornerbacks. And so it gives you it gives you context of what you should want out of the other guys. And then just quite frankly, not getting that. Now it gives them a lot of play because the other two guys are covering their guys. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think ultimately it's going to be one of those two. I guess gun to head, probably going to be Keeley. And then you have Adoree, break glass in case of emergency.
So what then do you make of that Bennett trade? We talked to Nick the day after the trade happened, and he obviously is going to keep things close to the vest. We hear all the same lines that he likes to use. We don't have to make any decisions right now. He just got here. Let's just get him into the room and get him up to speed with the scheme and everything. That said, they added him. They traded a player that they like at defensive tackle in Thomas Booker. Granted, it's a deep room there right now, and he became expendable as a result of it. But what do you make of the potential for Bennett and the role that he could potentially play on this team this year?
I mean, he's got 11 or so career starts over the first 2 years. He would have started more last year. He suffered a season-ending shoulder injury, so he's done it in this league. Has he been great? No, he's not great. Otherwise, they wouldn't have traded him. I do feel like scheme fit there was what compelled them to make him expendable. Pete Carroll plays a very specific type of defense. We all know about it. Legion of Doom, cover three is kind of his thing. He's kind of adapted a little bit more to what Fangio's done in recent years. But so that could explain why he's no longer there in Las Vegas. But that being said, let's read the tea leaves here. The depth there is not horrible. I think Eli Ricks was on an NFL roster all last year. Oh, he's with the Eagles, right? He just never played, but they kept him for a reason. They have a few other guys. McWilliams they just drafted. I mean, he's a rookie. I don't think they're going to expect a heck of a lot out of him. But you already have two Pro Bowl caliber guys with Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. So it does say something about the competition, if you ask me. I don't know if the Jacorian Bennett is going to go out there and win the job, but I think they want someone to push those two. And I guess maybe they didn't think they were getting it out of Eli Ricks and Mac McWilliams, an opportunity to add depth to the group. As you mentioned, Thomas Booker was in a group that they felt really good about some of the young guys. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the depth is as great as maybe that they feel it is. But because it's not just Gabe Hall, who's played well. I know maybe we'll talk about this a little later, but Ty Robinson, the rookie, they like. And you have Mora Jomo playing really well. I know I'm getting off course here, but I'm just wondering how that affects the decision to trade for Bennett. But we'll see how it plays out. I think we're going to know a lot more over these next few weeks, certainly in this game, and definitely next week when they have these joint practices.
Well, Bennett was out here on the field warming up. However, would not expect to see him in this game. He has not yet practiced with this team. He was present for practice, observing on the sideline most recently on Tuesday. However, very, very unlikely that we see him tonight, perhaps next week. Against the Cleveland Browns. Let's flip it over to the offensive side of the ball, Jeff. We're expecting to see some amount of Tanner McKee tonight. I feel like these preseason games have really been like the time for Tanner to shine. Obviously, over the last couple of years, we saw him emerge really in that 2023 preseason looking better than Marcus Mariota at times. And then, of course, last year, he's been really steady in these preseason showings. So we know what the Eagles have in Tanner McKee. He has been solid for them, solid enough to earn the backup role and to allow them to ship off Kenny Pickett to the Cleveland Browns, who are coming next week. I think the bigger intrigue right now is around the QB3 role, who that is going to be, and I'm inclined to say it's going to be Kyle McCord because the Eagles expended a draft pick on him. However, I would also argue that Dorian Thompson-Robinson has also been pretty solid, especially in recent weeks at training camp. Arguably at times, I think he's even been the better quarterback. I'm curious to know what you think too. But when you look at this upcoming preseason stretch, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot of McCord and DTR as the weeks progress. Perhaps we won't see them as much tonight. We'll see one of them, I would imagine, tonight if tonight's game follows the same formula as the preseason opener did last year, where we saw Kenny Pickett into the third quarter and then Tanner McKee for the rest of the game. But which backup behind McKee do you think has the most to prove in this preseason?
Well, I guess Dorian Thompson-Robinson, right? They got him in exchange for Kenny Pickett, right? So he's been around a little bit. He has a year or two of NFL experience under his belt. In the spring he didn't look so great, but he's learning a new scheme. I don't place much emphasis on that. Maybe at the beginning of this camp, but then he's had some nice stretches with some good throws. There's certain routes that he likes, and they're NFL routes, and you got to complete those on occasion. He does bring an element in the +1 QB game. So you don't have to change the offense that much from Jalen Hurts, at least that part of it. The RPO games, he's had some nice runs where I'm like, okay, in camp, where obviously the quarterbacks are untouchable, he probably could pick up a first down there on the draw play or whatever it is. And I think that he'll probably be up first before McCord. He's been around a little longer. They don't want to throw McCord to the Wolves right away, is my guess. Maybe McCord doesn't play as much or at all in this game. Just in recent practices, it seems like DTR has gotten more reps than McCord. I'm not suggesting that McCord hasn't played well and hasn't earned more. I just think that he's going to end up being the third guy probably on the roster. I don't think you expend a 5th round draft pick on him and don't think that he's development worthy. Yeah, they've had Clayton Thorson was maybe the exception to the rule there because he was so horrible.
Go Cats! Come on. No, it's fine.
The DTR, they're going to basically what they're doing here is they want to showcase him and maybe flip him to get something right before the roster cut down, and maybe they can get a 6th or 7th rounder for him as and someone sees a backup in him, because I just don't think he's going to end up on the 53 here. And Kyle McCord is someone that eventually you'll see later in the preseason, and you'll see that he can sling it. I mean, from what I see so far, I like the way he throws. I like his presence in the pocket. But you're right. I'm not really entirely sure that he'll play tonight.
Yeah, and Matt just asked this question over on YouTube. They say, could DTR be trade bait? And I think, Jeff, to your point, I think Dorian Thompson-Robinson is auditioning tonight to potentially be on another NFL roster. Maybe not via trade necessarily, but perhaps, maybe. But also, he might not end up on this 53 anyway. So perhaps other teams will be keeping their eye on him. He'll definitely be someone to watch as this preseason progresses, for sure. I think or a group of players who could benefit from some really strong quarterback play, regardless of who is under center, is going to be a lot of these bubble wide receivers. And the Eagles have quite a few players who currently, may or may not, you could argue, are on the outside looking in right now of that initial 53-man roster, especially second-year wide receivers Johnny Wilson and Aniyah Smith. They're still looking to establish some consistency right now in their games after kind of some up and down years in their rookie seasons, and I think some of that has carried over at times to training camp too. And then there's also a couple of training camp darlings that I think a lot of us in the media have kind of latched onto in Elijah Cooks, especially. He has been a consistent red zone threat. He's a really big body. Eli Ricks has talked quite a bit about him, and they have gone back and forth, gone at it with each other in camp. It's been like one of the more entertaining, kind of under the radar battles that we've gotten to see. He's really impressive when it comes to contested catches. 6'4", 215 pounds. Certainly someone to watch in tonight's game. And then there's also Darius Cooper, who's also come on recently, the 2025 undrafted free agent out of Tarleton State, who has made some plays in camp. So a lot of intrigue around the depth receivers. How many do you think ultimately the Eagles are going to keep on the roster? And then of that group, who do you think has the best chance of making it?
I guess 5 or 6. I think it's been more like 5 recently. It depends upon who's if Anaya Smith makes the roster, it's because he's also a punt returner. Can one of these other guys do that job as well? How much can they contribute on special teams? Because that's going to be a part of the job as well. Johnny Wilson can do that. Nick Sirianni mentioned that as one of the, one of his attributes the other day when he spoke about him. He's kind of like the blocking receiver. There's nothing Nick loves more than a blocking receiver. So my guess is Johnny Wilson will make it. Anais, I mean, I don't know if he's earned it or not, but these guys were both drafted by the Eagles. That he has been the number 1 punt returner for them, at least during camp. We'll see what happens tonight. He wasn't good enough, even close to good enough to doing it last year. He struggled and bobbled a lot of balls. I still see that on occasion at camp. Elijah Cooks and Darius Cooper, they're great camp stories. Maybe one of them sneaks in. Maybe one of them pushes one of those guys out. They're so good that you have no other choice but to give them a roster spot. And you see that on occasion. But there's a reason why Elijah Cooks was available for a futures contract in February, and there's a reason why Darius Cooper wasn't drafted. Let's see how they do it once the pads are on and they're playing against other competition. But yeah, I agree that both of them have had moments. Cook's a little more than Cooper, but Cooper's young and he's coming on, and we'll see how it plays out here over these next several weeks.
We'll take this question here from Fran over on Facebook. They want to know if anyone is playing, and someone is going to be playing for sure on this field, but will anyone of significance be playing?
Oh, is that what they meant?
I'm taking it, the interpretation is anyone truly, or any of the starters playing? I wouldn't expect to see, certainly not any of the offensive starters. The last 2 seasons, we have not seen any of Jalen Hurts in the preseason or any of the key offensive weapons. And then on the defensive side of the ball, we did get to see some defensive starters in the first preseason game last year for a little bit. It was a new scheme with Vic Fangio at the helm. I would be very doubtful that we'll see the Quinyon Mitchells and the Cooper DeJeans of the world. So that would be my read. The Bengals, that said, that their starters are going to be playing, according to Zach Taylor, for a couple drives. That's what he said. So it'll be a good test for, again, some of these competition battles. We've seen different players that are competing for spots right now to go up against some really great talent on the Bengals. Let's flip it over now to our player picks, Jeff. We've talked about a lot of different players so far. However, if there is one player that you are really interested in keeping an eye on in today's game, who would it be?
Yeah, we mentioned Jahad Campbell. I think I mentioned Jeremiah Trotter Jr. earlier. But he's been the guy at the Mike linebacker spot since the spring, and he's gotten the majority of reps there when Zach Baum was in there. Now that he hasn't been in there, and he's performed well. He's not super flashy, he's not super big, but more times than not, I see him in the right spot. I see him making the plays that he's supposed to make, and I've seen him make some excellent plays in terms of athleticism, in terms of being explosive enough to make those plays. I would not rule him out in that competition. I'm excited to see what he can do tonight. We obviously know a lot about his father and having to follow in those footsteps, but he's a very poised young man, and he's done it in the NFL already. He has played some snaps at that level. I imagine that he'll be able to, acquit himself quite well tonight.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with him in camp so far. Very instinctive and seems to know where to be at the right times. Obviously, the size is he is at a disadvantage compared to the Jahad Campbells of the world. However, I think he has the right head on his shoulders to potentially have success in this role. So we'll see how he performs tonight. I'm really interested in keeping an eye on the edge rusher spot, specifically with Josh Uche and Azeez Ojulari. The two of them coming in on these one-year deals have the ceiling, you could go as far as to say, that the Eagles had so much success with Zach Bond. Who could be the Zach Bond of this year's free agency class? And the two of these guys on one-year deals with quite a bit to prove, especially Ojulari, who had a really impressive rookie season with the New York Giants and then kind of petered out from there. We'll see if he's able to find that spark again. We haven't really seen a whole lot of it in camp, though. I would say he has been, of the two, a little bit quieter. Now he is going up against the Lane Johnsons and Jordan Mailatas of the world. It is not an easy task for a defensive end going up against that starting Eagles offensive line and those tackles in particular. But Uche has really come on, I would say, in recent practices, seeing him a little bit more disruptive in the backfield and getting pressure on Jalen Hurts. So I'm curious if he is able to continue to sustain that success against the Bengals here tonight. So those two I will be laser focused on throughout the game. All right, Jeff, we typically would do predictions at this juncture, and I would ask you for a final score. I'm not going to ask you for a final score because we might as well just no one can look at the scoreboard throughout the game. It doesn't matter. Just leave it. But that being said, I still want to know if there is like a particular stat, if there's someone who you feel pretty confident, okay, this player is going to have this kind of performance. Who are you lasering in on in terms of that output from tonight's game?
I don't think I feel confident about whether this guy's even going to play. I assume Will Shipley's going to be out there for some carries. But, he's pretty much kind of went out and grabbed that number 2 running back job. I know A.J. Dillon's here, and he's done it before, but they really love Will Shipley. And quite frankly, what I've seen out there is that he's ready for that role. He's got to work on blitz pickup. That's the one area that I'd be most concerned about when they need to have him out there on passing downs. But I assume he's going to get his fair number of touches, so I'm going with 12 over under. Do I have to tell you what I think is going to happen, over or under, or do I?
No. I mean, what I am curious though is the breakdown.
I should ask you. What
touches.
do you think?
I want to know the breakdown. Do you think he's like related to like carries or receptions? Like, how do you think that 12 is going to?
Yeah, 9 carries, 3 catches. This is probably too much. But what are you going with? Over under on that?
On 12. I'm trying to think if I agree with 12 over under. I'm gonna go. I don't know. I kind of want to go under on that. Just because I think I want to see more, and I would hope this team wants to see more from A.J. Dillon in today's game, because I think they know what they have in Will Shipley. They had him in the building all of last season. He's not a starter, so there's a solid chance that he will play in today's game. But I don't know. The jury's still out on A.J. Dillon. I think he, coming back from a big injury, didn't play all of last season. As he dealt with a neck injury. Now he's back, and I think this is a great time for him to show, hey, it's a live tackling in a preseason game. We're gonna be able to see the most of A.J. Dillon tonight that we will have seen all training camp long so far. So I would hope that they get Dillon involved a little bit more than Shipley, but that's my big question. I'm taking the under. That's a really long way of saying
I should mention Will Shipley could have a kick return.
Oh. Does that count as a touch? Are we counting that as a touch?
Yeah, that counts as a touch. All right.
No.
All right. Okay, we go on to the next one.
My prediction, my non-score prediction for today's game. This is a really bold one, and I might even take the under on this one. 200 passing yards for Tanner McKee. I think, as I mentioned before, this is a big game for some of these depth receivers, and they have the benefit of playing with QB2 Tanner McKee. I think he's a great talent, and I think that some of these receivers are going to step up, make some big plays, and make his stats look really great. So I'm going with 200 passing yards for Tanner McKee. Are you taking the under on that one, Jeff? Okay, you're going under.
Yeah, way under. I don't think the Eagles on whole are going to have 200 yards passing.
It would be a surprise, but crazier things have happened, and
okay.
I'm kind of thinking maybe like a really big explosive play or two here. But that's really where
I think we're both aiming too high with our over-unders, but that's okay.
Well,
it's the first week. It's preseason for us too.
Absolutely. We'll keep a running tally. We'll check back in next preseason game and we'll see how we did, and I'm sure we'll come back with another outlandish sort of take as well. All right, everybody, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Eagles Gameday Central. As a reminder, as always, you can head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Gameday if you're not already over there. We will be commenting and chatting with you in real time, so we look forward to seeing you over there.
Check out my podcast, Uncovering the Birds. where I take you behind the scenes each week with exclusive reporting, interviews, and everything you might have missed about your favorite football team. New episodes drop weekly at inquire.com/podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Again, thank you so much for tuning in to Gameday Central, and we will see you next time.
Bye.